Previously on Nerd Punches Nerd.
No, I mean, there's a lot to talk about with Arrival, especially with the time travel and how it works and the.
All right, fuck you guys. It's Arrival's number 3.
All right,
Right.
fine.
Okay.
You happy?
What's-
Hello and welcome to Nerd Punches Nerd, the only podcast where a bunch of nerds pretend to physically fight over minor pop culture minutia. I'm Jeremy, here with Benji and Sam, and a godly morning to you guys.
Ooh, a goodly morning to you, sir.
Godly morning to you.
So today we're going to be discussing and tussing over American gods and various, fantasy fatigue overload. But before we get started, I have a simple question, which is, if you could go on a road trip with any god in America, just like drive around or whatever, who would be the worst god and who would be the best god? Let's
Road trip meaning, so you said just driving around. We should be clear. Road trip means when you're going on an extended trip.
yeah,
Somehow, like a long trip, okay?
yes,
And they're going to have to be your companion in the car. Yeah.
Right.
that's correct, on said road. All right, so I think we'll just go around the horn. We'll go Sam, Benji, then me. All right, so Sam.
All right. Very good. Okay, so number one god to go on a road trip with is, for me, Jesus. I know, kind of unexpected, right? Controversial choice here, but hear me out. Hear me out. Right? Jesus is like a really laid back, cool guy, right? Easy to get along with. He's fun. He turns water into wine. I just think that would be like a really fun trip. So
I guess
Jesus
he'd forgive
it is
you.
for me.
He'd forget, if you messed up something, he's like, it's all
Yeah,
good.
exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
I forgive you.
He's
Like,
very
you spilled
forgiving
some
and
coffee on
loving.
him. Yeah.
He would never get mad at you or anything. He's just, he's, and of course he, if he's always gonna turn the other cheek. So it's just, I just imagine him being the perfect road companion.
Is he gonna die at the end of the road trip for your sins? Is that you're forgetting about that twist? Yeah,
well, that could be good too, right?
Yeah.
So it all works out for you, but it doesn't work out for Jesus,
yeah.
which I guess is the whole point.
That is the point. All right, good. So that's one. And okay, and the god that I would least want to go on a road trip with is Zeus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Zeus he's kind of an asshole. He's always bossing people around. He would be the worst backseat driver,
That's true.
And also he would be trying to hit on every single woman that you pass on the entire trip, just constantly stopping to be trying to have sex with this woman and that woman, and that would just be awful. You would just be constantly holing up in motels. You would be sexiled, just awful. So I'm
Yelling out the passenger's side. Of his
Yes,
best friend's life.
yes, exactly right.
Trying to holler.
Those are my choices. Best road trip companion god, Jesus. Jesus is my co-pilot. Worst road trip companion god is Zeus.
Nice.
But who has a better beard? You see, that's the real question. No?
I think he doesn't.
Probably Zeus. I think Zeus has a better beard.
Well, he
He's
can't.
definitely
Yeah.
also Lord it over, be like, oh, I clearly have a better beard. Who's this Jesus guy?
All right. Okay. Mr. Benj.
Okay, so best, I think Apollo. Apollo. Here's the thing. Apollo is a road warrior. He knows what he's doing. Okay? I think he knows how to talk. I think he's one of those guys who he's been on the road so much he knows how to have a good road conversation, but also knows when to shut up. He knows what he's doing, he's competent. I think we would switch driving at different times, and he also knows first aid. That's the thing. He's also he's also a god of medicine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if anything went down and you got your car went off the side of the road or something like that, I think he'd know what he's doing. So he's just a competent dude. So And then he'd get there on time too. He'd make sure you get there on time without being crazy. Not like Hermes, because I first was thinking of Hermes, but Hermes would be a pain in the ass. He'd just be speeding the whole time. Like,
Yeah, that's really true.
Like Hermes would probably get there safely. He's probably one of those crazy drivers who does get there safely, and
He
and
gets
doesn't do it. It's like,
himself there safely.
okay, there's
Yeah.
that too. So I think he was driving fine. We get the car there. He wouldn't care. He's like, all right, we're done. I'm like, that
Yeah.
was a so shitty trip. But Apollo knows what he's doing.
Okay.
I think the worst would be, and I guess this is apropos of American Gods, but I think Anansi would be my least favorite, and here's why. I think he'd be playing like tricks and things like that throughout, but he'd be sort of like acting like, oh, he's saying all this like funny stuff. He would try to play off as being funny, but he'd be constantly actually pissing you off. Because
Right.
like Loki, like I just wouldn't get in the car with Loki because
He's like,
I'm trying to think of a trick story. But like Loki, I'd be like, oh, well, I already know from the movies, Loki, that you.
Well, the problem is if Loki invited you on a road trip, you'd be like, oh crap, is this like a double trick? Like if I don't go on the road trip, that's what he really wants.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would kind of distinguish between like, you know, the actual Loki and like Tom Hiddleston Loki, because I think Tom Hiddleston Loki actually would be fun to go on a road trip with.
I think you're right. I
Are
think.
you saying you just want to go on a road trip with Tom Hiddleston, Sam? Is that?
Yeah, you could. You could.
I totally would.
You could dish about Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Um,
It comes down to, you just want to go.
Yeah, that doesn't count. All right. Okay.
Yeah, no, I just feel like Anansi would actually like over time, like when you stop off at a motel, he might do something like the springs in your bed or something. That's hilarious to him. Like it'll fold up when.
I feel like Anansi would just basically get you into jams and you'd have a horrible time, and then he'd like trick his way out of it and come out looking great, and you'd just be miserable. So I think.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, you'd either be dead or you have learned something. And I don't think you really want that from a road trip.
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, I love Anansi the character, but as a road trip companion,
yeah.
not so much.
Okay, so I really thought you might pick Q, but I guess.
Didn't think about that.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that either.
Well, Q is a god. I don't think we can really, argue. I mean, he's clearly a god. So.
Yeah.
But I picked a kind of a deep cut from the, if you remember Dragonlance, there's a character, there's like a god named, like Rorks, and he's basically the god of dwarves. He's one of the neutral gods, so he's not particularly good or evil, but he's kind of good-hearted, if a bit of, not the smartest tool, in the shed, as they say. But, he loves drinking, he loves going on trips and adventures, and, I think he'd be fun. And he wouldn't be like sanctimonious like Aslan. If you went on a road trip with Aslan, he'd be like, "Oh no, we have to go help out those people." And you're like, ugh. Right, and if you did,
they were saying Jesus would be a good companion, but Aslan would.
Oh no, he'd be awful. And there are so many terrible choices for like your worst one. I was thinking maybe like, well, Cthulhu would like. If he was with you, it'd be basically the end of the world, so that would be pretty bad.
Right.
But I guess I was thinking, who would be even worse would be like the Great Other from Song of Ice and Fire. It just like, because you'd just be bringing like ice and death wherever you went. I don't even know what he looks like, but it doesn't really matter.
True.
You're just like, why is every place just this? This is not a spoiler, Benji. Come on. We're talking about references to the books here.
All right.
Anyway, so let's start talking about this television show. Now, as we all know, there is this character invented by the British authority, and this guy named Neil Gaiman. He's a composite of many different writers working to make it seem like there's just one British guy, because they basically picked the guy who has the most soothing voice. He was like smart enough to talk about a lot of stuff, but they're like, it's like, as we all know, it's like Neil Gaiman. Come on, it's not a real name. Anyway,
I have heard people pronounce it Gaiman before, but I don't think I've ever heard him actually actually pronounce it that way. I think it is.
He says Gaiman when he talks about himself.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably what we should say. So in 2001, he came out with the book American Gods, although I didn't read it for a while because I think I didn't get into that. Well, the truth is I didn't really get into Neil Gaiman until much later anyway, partially
Hmm.
because I wasn't getting into comic book related stuff and, you know, for whatever reason, I just didn't know about that stuff. And he didn't really start writing fiction until later for the most part.
Right.
I mean, he did obviously a bunch of, like, I think, you know, Neverwhere was in 96, and I didn't read that. In 99 was Stardust.
Right. Although even Neverwhere, I think it started originally as
As
a
a,
radio play. Am I remembering that right?
that's sort of right, but
Yeah, I
it was
think.
actually it was a miniseries that he wrote.
Oh, that's right. It was a mini series, and then it became a book.
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, it was a
Uh,
radio miniseries?
no, a television show. It
Right.
was like
Okay,
a,
so it was
on
the
the,
television miniseries before the book.
yes,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's all right. Uh, the it's a kind of an interest. You know, at the time there was a spoken word release when the TV show came out, so that may be why you're thinking that it's a radio. It was a radio play
Mm.
first.
Yeah.
It's not like Hitchhiker's Guide where it was actually radio first. But anyway, so I found out about it when you were reading Anansi Boys, Spanish,
Right.
and you know then I went back to read American Gods, and I was definitely one of those things where I was like, this is kind of odd, but I definitely liked it a lot, you know, and that's kind of like how I got into that stuff, and then I've read a lot of his crap since then, you know,
Mm-hmm.
as it is, and I've seen many of his appearances, including like the Simpsons thing, obviously that was really good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy because that's already 6 years old by this point. That
Wow.
Yeah.
Gaiman episode. Jesus, like that's how long The Simpsons have been going on. Is that it's been over
Yeah.
5 years
When,
since Neil
whenever you
Gaiman's
think about a
episode.
recent Simpsons episode, it's always at least like 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah, right. So I mean, it's still going. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. But anyway, the American Gods was a very interesting concept, and it was sort of similar in a lot of ways to the whole Song of Ice and Fire. And it seems like how it would be very difficult to adapt into something like a movie, which of course
What's like Song of Ice and Fire?
American Gods. Unlike a lot of his other books, like Stardust is a relatively short book, for example.
I don't see how it's like Song of Ice and Fire.
No,
What's the
I'm
point?
saying in that it would be difficult to adapt to a movie.
Okay. Yeah.
It's very like it's very confusing in a lot of places. It's intentionally obtuse. There's a lot of weird imagery where he just doesn't tell you things.
Right.
And there's a lot of kind of mysteries where some of them are obvious to the reader if you think about it, and they're not obvious to the characters. And other things you're just like, oh, how was I that stupid not to think about it? And I think we're all going to be saying we're going to be doing spoilers for the book, right? And I guess for the TV show too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sam, you're okay
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in I know that the twist that I felt stupid for was the character of Low Key, spelled like
Oh,
LOW,
yes.
was Lie Smith, was which was spelled like lie, like the chemical instead of it's like the fact that he was Loki. I was like, oh my god, of course, because I figured out it was Odin pretty early. Basically, as soon as he says like, oh Wednesday, that's my day. I'm like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
that's is that is oh American Gods, maybe it's Odin. And then it was like, oh no, yeah, it's Odin. So that one I figured out relatively early, but the Loki, I was like, that was a twist I did not see coming, and I was like, oh wow, all right. Of course, it makes perfect sense, but uh, I think that one of the things that's interesting is he had been trying to get it made sort of off and on for years. But
Right.
one of the things he talked about was like people always wanted to really cut out a lot of stuff for a movie. They wanted to have the main character just be a white guy, and he was like, no, he's supposed to be
Do actually who the character is, please.
talking about the main character, Shadow.
Yeah, I
Shadow,
know. I know. I know.
Shadow.
I'm saying like he was like Neil Gaiman was like, yeah, can you please do who the character actually is? No.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of described as being kind of ethnically ambiguous,
Hmm.
like sort of
Yeah.
dark skinned, not white.
Right. Clearly not white though.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
So
that's very clear.
Yeah.
now, exactly what does that mean? I mean, he never said black explicitly. And in fact, there's a couple points where he sort of like, it sort of implied that his mom is probably black, but that's about the extent of it. And of course, given what we know, which is that Odin, or at least Mr. Wednesday, is his father, that it's, you know, you can kind of see how that makes sense. And then he doesn't actually know what his background is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the show, they're very explicit, obviously, because you can't really get around that, you know,
Right.
very easily. I mean, you can try to cast someone who looks at more ethnically ambiguous, but that's a lot harder. And even then, it's going to be like, well, what does that really mean? You know, you can just like you can just have it just not talk about it, he not think about it, and if somebody asks, he can just be like, I don't know, maybe, which is essentially what he does in the book.
Right.
He's like, you got any N-word blood in you, boy? It's like, maybe. But of
Yeah.
course, in the show they didn't do that because it doesn't. That would be stupid because he obviously
Right.
looks black. So, you know, if you know the racist warden asked him that, he'd be like, no, of course not. He's like, what do you think? So, that was an interesting choice. I thought that they made in the show, in that they were already starting from a point of, well, we gotta already start thinking about it this way because when you have that ambiguity, you can kind of play on that a little bit and make people uncomfortable and they're sort of not sure. Whereas in the show, you kind of can't avoid certain allusions and connections. Like as you know, we've all read the book, so we remember that there is a part where Shadow essentially hangs himself, although
Mm-hmm.
not by the neck, but still on the tree that is obviously an allusion to Yggdrasil, the world tree of Norse mythological
Yes. Yes.
lore,
Mm-hmm.
to do the same thing. But did you ever finish reading the Norse mythology book by Neil Gaiman, Sam?
No. Oh, you're trying to. Oh, yeah.
Sam, have you read it?
No.
Definitely recommend it. It's very good and very
Mm-hmm.
interesting. He's basically his kind of like retelling of the classic Norse myths with a little bit of his shine on it, but they're all very good.
I
And
mean, Neil Gaiman's a master. He's just amazing.
yeah,
So.
but he also knows this stuff really well. Like he
Right.
knows like all the El Dorado stuff, and he kind of like he even in that book he talks about how there's a lot of stories that were lost, and he said like there were references in some of these stories to some of the other stories that
Mm-hmm.
they're like, oh, this is just like the time that Loki did this, and they're like, well, what's that story? And we just don't know
Right. Right.
because the problem is the El Dorado was already like a reproduction of like older collected tales from centuries earlier, and because the truth is the North people didn't really write down their stuff, so we don't really have
Right.
it. There's a lot that's just lost.
Right.
So a lot of it is like transmitted. So it's kind of interesting from that. But anyway, one of the points I was saying is like there is this whole thing about Odin, and he kind of says this in the book and the show. He sacrifices himself to himself,
Right.
which is a very kind of interesting, meta, clever idea about like a god who's sacrificing. He's like, can you
Yes.
sacrifice anything more than a god? And if you do it to
Right.
yourself, well, that's interesting, especially because the whole dedicate deaths and everything. So
Yeah.
he's
And is that how he
doing it.
gets? Is that the same thing as the story with his eye? Like, or like, is the sacrificing himself to himself to get wisdom as well?
Yeah,
Or is
he
it?
gets wisdom. He learns a lot of magic, and the eye
The
thing
eye thing is
is
definitely for
different.
wisdom,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
The,
he
the eye is
basically
for wisdom,
give
right? And I think that was the one that sort of permeated or percolated more down to
yeah
whatever the word is to our culture where we hear about the eye thing. But I think
yeah
the sacrificing self to self was something that really Neil Gaiman sort of brought to the forefront.
yeah. So anyway, and that's sort of one of the things that Shadow is doing. He sacrifices himself to himself, and he gains more powers and capabilities and strength and wisdom by doing it. By living
Right.
through it, he is essentially sacrificing himself to himself. But of course, once you start having to integrate, the image of the black man being hung, it changes a lot of that, and it's not just as simple. Because I know when I first read the American Gods, I didn't think of him as black. The truth is, I didn't really think of him as anything, but that's mainly because I don't really usually think of things. I don't visualize when I'm reading that much.
Hmm.
That's just how I read. I just don't really think about it like that. I know some people are very uh, visual heavy. When they read something, they start picturing things. I don't know if you guys are like that.
You know what signs I see? You guys might find this funny. Do you guys remember the Torah cards back in the day? You know what I'm talking about? You know how they didn't
Uh,
have like all the features on their faces? Do you remember that?
oh yeah,
Remember,
wow, yeah.
remember it was like they would have like their beards, of course. I mean, of course. Do you think Moshe
Okay.
Rabbeinu was not gonna have it? I don't know if they had one with Moshe Rabbeinu. They might have. I don't remember everyone they had, but remember they would
Oh,
have like their
you're not talking about the ones of like,
not the
you
red,
know,
not the
like from like the 19th and 20th centuries. You're talking about like old ones,
no,
right?
there were these like actual like drawn or like painted cards of like they were like stuff from like the Chumash, and there was stuff from the Tanakh. It was like a lot of
Right.
it was stuff like that. So you might have like like Yoshua or like I don't know if they had like I don't know if they had like Moses explicitly in it, but I think they had
Well,
Aaron. You know,
yeah, but
they had
what's your
they,
point, Benj?
no. My point is that you wouldn't see the features of their faces. It would
Mm,
be like you'd see their beards, as I said, of course, and then you may see like sort of a nose, but you then you'd see like the rest of like there would still be a person, um, but um, but it's but but what I'm saying is when I read, I just see kind of an image like that, like kind of a blank face, sort of. Um, so like trying to get into individual descriptions, like features, like I don't see that as vividly. I just think it's
mm,
interesting, like what people see when they read, like what you were saying. So yeah,
mm. Well, that is interesting. I think that I don't really know what I expected necessarily from it. And we've talked about it before how they've been trying to make the show forever. And after all the movie things, he just basically said, I don't think this is ever going to happen. And it didn't, obviously. But
mm-hmm.
he got, once he sort of started to talk with different people about making the show, that was a different story because then it seemed like, oh, you could actually do something about this. Of course, one of the things that's funny about the show, the movie, like the show versus the book, is that the book does have an end, a very explicit end, even though he says he's been working on a sequel forever. Him and Martin have both working on things, obviously, but
Right.
so there is like an end point. And one of the issues that I've had with the recent seasons of Game of Thrones is it feels like they're just hurrying to the end, and there's all sorts of things they've cut out because they're just like, we gotta get this over with. And it does feel like they're like, we just want to finish, and they're very commercially enjoyed by a lot of people, and they're certainly critically liked, but especially by people who don't read the books. Uh, and I understand that because if you haven't read the books, I feel like there's a lot to like in the show, but I just feel
Right.
like it's not. The further it's gotten away, the more just normally TV-ish it's gotten. It's not as deep as it used to be, as it could be. And part of that is that they're just kind of taking what I assume are the general outlines and just making up their own ways of dealing with it.
Right.
And so American Gods kind of has a similar thing, although they are working with Neil Gaiman. He's not running the show.
Right.
So he's sort of like there as sort of like an executive producer, but that just essentially means you're involved in some way, but you don't have complete control. And executive producer can really mean almost anything when it comes to
Right.
shows. It can mean you have a lot of control because you're where the money's coming from. It can mean you're a shout out just to say like, hey, we're going to give you some money. We have some, you have a cut of the profits. So we're making you an
Right.
executive producer. That happens a lot. Sometimes there are some TV shows where it'll eventually be like, oh, now Ray Romano is an executive producer of Everybody Loves Raymond. And does it mean he's actually controlling it? Maybe, but he's
Right.
probably just means he's like, now he has more of a piece.
Right.
And so I don't really know exactly. He certainly talked to the showrunners a lot, but it's interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about what the deal is here. So HBO originally said that they thought they were going to do something, and that was
With
like,
American Gods.
yeah, and that was like, oh, it was an interesting idea, and then they couldn't get it done, and then Stars picked it up. Yeah, this is over the course of like from 2011 is when HBO said they're going to do it to 2014 is when Stars said they're going to do it.
Right.
And so it took until this year to actually make it. Like last year that we heard that they started filming it basically, and it was sort of interesting because like it was delayed a little bit, but uh, I want to tell you like I am kind of a little different on Brian Fuller, who is one of the main showrunners. He did Dead Like Me, which I did see a bunch of, and then Wonder Falls, which I didn't watch, Pushing Daisies, which I got sick of, Hannibal, which I got sick of. And like a lot of his thing is about like very interesting visuals, kind of quirky characters, and like that are a lot of like underlying darkness with like kind of cheeriness that make that with a lot of like actually weird, horrible stuff underneath. And that's kind of like his shtick. He likes to reuse a lot of the same actors. I mean, like, he's like Orlando Jones was on Pushing Daisies, for example. He's used Gillian Anderson was in Hannibal. And Gillian Anderson, sorry.
Really?
Yeah, Kristen Chenoweth was one of the main stars of Pushing Daisies as well.
And you said he's had Orlando Jones before because I hadn't seen him for a while.
Yeah, he was in
I was
Pushing.
happy to see him in this.
He was in Pushing Daisies. Like so that was like, I mean, the thing is that show I got really sick of, but he's done a lot of interesting stuff, and I think a lot of people really love a lot of things. Yeah, for me it's interesting because he started in Star Trek. He was a writer on DS9 for 2 episodes, and then he was a producer on Voyager and a writer. And he did like 80 episodes for Voyager.
Did you do the episode where they're in the area where there's like no stars and Neelix goes crazy?
I don't know that.
I was like, that's a darker one. So.
He did like 80 episodes, so maybe there were a lot of So he was one of the main producers. Because what happens is like
the one where they make the banana pancakes from the whatever it's called. What's the name of the thing they make food?
I don't know. What the hell are you talking about? Sam, what is he?
It's okay, Benji. It's okay. I remember the banana pancakes.
You do?
Okay, good.
Well, because you were just rewatching this, so you know what he's talking about. All right, good. So I was like, is he just like, messing with me?
What's her name again? The half playing woman?
Oh, Balana.
Right. I remember at the end, she gets her banana pancakes, and she's like, yes, banana pancakes. I just remember that.
Oh my gosh.
That end, she's so happy at the end.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, so Brian Fuller is interesting. He's an openly gay producer and writer, and there's definitely things that kind of connect, I think, with what he's done with a lot of his shows, where he tries to, put out more normalization of gay people, and also not just that, but just like references to things. One of the things that kind of tired me out with American Gods is how he kept having Gillian Anderson dressed up in another one of like another gay icon, like over and over again. Like like in the last episode, she was dressed as Judy Garland from some specific Easter-related movie that I'd never seen, and I only knew this because I looked up. I was like, was she dressed as something I was supposed to know? And I didn't know it, so I looked up later, and it's like, oh, it's some movie with Judy Garland and Fred Astaire called like Let's Have Fun in Easter, because that's the I don't know. I'm sure I'm saying the name wrong, but
and it's just like with a tap dance too. It's like that's part of the attraction that there's going to be a tap dance number in the movie.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah. So she's.
If there was more tap dancing in American Gods, I might have liked it better.
All right. Well,
Right.
so as you remember from the book, Lucy from I Love Lucy is the first time that he sees like media, when Shadow sees media, right?
Yes.
And that's like kind of weird and creepy, and he's like, and it's kind of an odd scene. It's done very differently in the show. I think, did you see that one already? Was that in
Yes,
one?
I did.
Okay.
I did see that.
Yeah, I thought it was fine. I mean, the thing is, one of the problems with this kind of adaptation is that the truth is, 5 years after 2000, 5 years after 2011, there's a difference. But 15 years after 2001, it's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's just things that just don't fit unless you did it as a time of the, unless you wanted to do like a of the time thing, which you could do. You could have had it be all in 2001 if you wanted to, but then it feels like you're kind of missing out because the truth is it was written before September 11th, and that's a big
Mm-hmm.
change. And,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things you could talk about with like homophobia and racism and Islamophobia now that, would be a little bit different if you talked about it then. And I think that's one
And
of the
also just
things.
the internet in general,
Well,
just
yes.
technology in general is way different.
Yeah, I mean, it was the starting, it was like there, it was like starting to become huge. Then certainly that's why he talked about it, but it's a much different kind of internet now than it was then.
Right.
Like the portrayal of, the the digital boy character is also different. There's also one of the issues I had with the show is the lack of saying things a lot. And it's sort of like it seemed like they were relying on news outlets to tell you things and recaps, which kind of annoys me. Like for example, people called like in the first episode, Loki is there. He is never mentioned by name in the entire episode.
Right.
Maybe because they realize that saying the name out loud
If
makes
you
it
say
too
it out
obvious.
loud, then it makes it really obvious. And
However,
also, like, now that
almost
there's like a Marvel character named Loki, like
yeah, that's
people
true.
are more familiar with that character.
Yeah. In every review I saw, other than mine, people said his name, and I was like, he didn't say it in the show. And then
Yeah.
people were like, the secret's behind, and I was like, why are you telling people all the twists about this stuff? I didn't like
The
that.
secret's behind the book, and here are just spoilers for the book.
Yeah, right. It's like explanation of all these characters. It's like, just say that he's a prison friend. He doesn't even have a name. And the truth is, he doesn't need a name technically. If you can still retain some of that twist of it. You haven't gotten to the point of Mr. World, which is a change. Now I have to assume that Mr. World will still end up being Loki, and that'll be a twist later. Because why wouldn't they do that? But the fact is, they did it differently. He's played by famous creepy actor. Do you remember
Right.
who? You remember who plays him, Benj?
Crispin Glover.
Yeah.
And he's actually really good at it.
He is
he's
good,
done a really good
but
job.
I don't have an issue with any of the actors. But anyway, let me just get back to my complaint about Gillian Anderson. So that Lucy thing, I kind of liked. Maybe Sam didn't like it, but I thought it was pretty decent. In the newer version of the same thing. But then she starts doing more. She starts doing David Bowie, and then Marilyn Monroe, and then Judy Garland, and it's just like, I feel like it's just like Brian Fuller, has like a, whatever the opposite of a man crush is, like, where they say like, like where guys say like, oh, I have a guy crush on this guy. It seems like he has like a lady crush on Gillian Anderson. Not that he's attracted to her, but that he just really likes her and admires her.
Right.
Well, I think she does.
Actually, I mean, like that goes to one thing that annoyed me about the show. And granted, like I haven't seen the whole show. I only watched the first couple of episodes, but I could already tell that like that I don't know if it's Brian Fuller or whatever, but this show has like a tendency very different from the book of like going back to the well and like reusing things over and over again as a sort of, I don't know, I guess it's for like atmosphere or whatever. But like for instance, the scene with what's her name, the goddess who's like a prostitute,
Sheba, Bilquis.
Bilquis,
yeah.
Right. So the scene with Bilquis, like, fine. In the first episode, that was like basically straight from the book. They did it okay. Maybe they could have done the scene a little better, but it was fine. But then, like, they did it again in the second episode, and it just seems pointless. Like, yeah, we saw this already, but like now you're just like giving it to us again.
Yeah, well,
like,
I think I think you're right. I think I know why they did it. Although I will say, let me just before I say anything else, they've already said that they felt like the first season wasn't what they wanted it to be, but it helped. But they felt like it helped crystallize what they actually think they can do with the next season. That's what they said. Because to me, I liked a lot of the first season. It was also kind of a mess. Like one of the things that happens with Bilquis, and well, I'll just spoil this for you, Sam, because I don't think it matters, is that basically they've changed her story where actually she is working for the new gods. And what they did was they gave her this like dating app called Sheba as a kind of way for people to worship her, essentially. And that's what she uses to pick up people. So it's a little bit different. So she's in a much better place than she is in the book, where she's basically just a prostitute.
Right.
So you assume that she's gonna, die anyway, but
Right. Well, okay, but we should get into like, because again, what we want to talk about is like what we think is like the watchability of it, and whether we'd recommend it.
yeah.
So I mean, like, I don't know. You want to start that off, Jeremy, or maybe we should start with Sam, who has the most negative view,
Hmm.
and go from there. And because Jeremy, I think you have the most positive. I think out of the three of us
Okay.
with it, right?
Okay, yeah, sure. I'll go
Yeah.
first. So I watched the first two episodes. There were a lot of things that I really didn't like about the show. For one thing was like how different the tone is from the book, in the
Hmm.
sense that like it's not just it's different from the book, whatever, but like the book has like everything that's going on is like weird and mysterious, but it's also subtle. You're not even really sure if anything's going on at all most of the time, or if it's
Mm-hmm.
just like maybe like Shadow's like maybe it's all in my head. Like he can't really tell,
Right.
right, most of the time what's going on or if anything's going on. In the show, it's like really over the top, and this part of this is Brian Fuller's style. Where I understand that he likes to do these like hyper, like saturated, high
Stylized.
contrast, stylized kind of visuals, but like it makes everything look eerie and surreal, which is like really like hammers home to you the fact that like no, it's not normal. Nothing is normal. This is like a bizarre thing that's happening, which like you're not supposed to necessarily know or understand at this early stage of the narrative. So that was something that bothered me. Also, just like there were a lot of scenes that I felt like in the book are more like understated, like the Viking scene at the beginning, or the scene with the slaves on the slave ship, with
Anansi.
Anansi or
Yeah.
whatever. Like there's like so many scenes that I felt like in the book, like stuff is happening, but it's like under the surface, or like or it like surprises you with like things that you weren't expecting, or like goes it like turns in another direction, or maybe it just like doesn't seem to really go anywhere, but it's just there like to like file that away in for background. But like on the show, everything has to be like super like violent and intense and like over the top, and it's like the whole thing is like these people are worshiping these gods and they are sacrificing to these gods. Like they're like they don't trust their audience, to be able to like figure these things out without having it like shoved in front of their faces. So that was that's another thing that I didn't like about the show. And there were a lot of scenes also that like used like actual dialogue, like taking exact quotes
Yes.
from the book and putting it into the mouths of the actors on the show, but somehow like changing the tone so that it comes off very differently than it does in the book.
Mm-hmm.
That I felt was just off, and like I think they would have been better off just like changing the dialogue and writing their own dialogue instead
Do you have an
of
example?
like trying to like, I don't know. I'm thinking like like Shadow's fight in the bar with Mad Sweeney.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the dialogue there is like directly from the book, but somehow it like comes off
Well,
differently.
it is definitely in that scene. You're right, because they change it around.
Yeah.
Although I think especially a lot of what Wednesday says when they just quote things directly, I think it feels the same to me.
So let me say this, because I didn't completely hate the show. I think Wednesday is great. He's
Right.
Probably my favorite character on the show. Like I think he's the one who really like fits. And also, I mean, Chernobog. Chernobog was also like
Yeah,
one of my
Peter
favorite
Stormare.
characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he also really feels like, yes, they got him. They figured out who this person is, this character, and they like got an actor who fits him, and they like, he's directed in such a way that like that's what in my mind Chernobog is supposed to be, and Wednesday also, like that's in my mind pretty close to like what I imagine Mr. Wednesday to be. But like for the most part, most of the characters weren't like that. I mean, you have Shadow's interactions with his what's her name? his
Laura,
wife's friend
Audrey.
who's at the funeral, Audrey, and he has these interactions with her that those things happened in the book, but in like a very different way. You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
it was
like
in the
bleaker.
book,
It was
it's bleaker and sadder and like just more like understated.
Mm-hmm.
And in the show, she's like all like emotional and like she just like all volatile, like all over the place.
Yeah. Although again, I
although
think
they actually don't. They take out the thing like in the book where she like spits in Laura's face at the funeral.
right.
They like
They
removed
did.
that. Like they took some things out, but they like left. I don't know. It was weird.
But I think
I did really like Mr. Wednesday.
Well, I think.
did. Yeah.
I was gonna say. Well, I think a lot of these choices, the Audrey one, I think is definitely one is because they're trying to enhance or expand certain roles. They did more. They had a whole like episode with like Laura interacting with Audrey after she comes back from the dead later.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of that is just to give it a little bit more, so she could have a little bit more, so that she could do that. Yeah, okay. But I think that's a lot of the choices where you say like, why did they do that? And I think it's they wanted to extend things. Some of those things I think work better than other things.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand why they did some things, but like whatever. There were a lot of aesthetic choices, that I didn't necessarily agree with in terms of like tone and things like that. One thing that I did actually appreciate was I thought they, despite the fact that I didn't particularly like the scene where Shadow fights Mad Sweeney,
Mm-hmm.
I liked the casting for Mad Sweeney.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize, Jeremy, until I read your review of that episode, that the guy who plays Mad Sweeney is Pornstache
Yeah.
from Orange Is the New Black.
Yeah.
And that he's also
Sabatka.
Nick Sabatka?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which
I
Sabatka
think
is
so.
he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Nick
First of all,
Sabatka,
I didn't realize that Nick Sabatka and Pornstache were the same guy.
Really?
I
That's what
didn't realize that they were the same guy as Mad Sweeney. So now I'm like, holy shit! Like this guy is awesome.
Yeah. Three very different characters.
Yes, very, very different characters.
Well, I will say one of the things that you didn't really get to is that I really like the evolution of his and Laura's relationship. And they kind of change. One of the episodes that I liked.
Shadow.
No, Sweeney.
Sweeney. Oh, okay.
They had there's a whole little Coming to America thing about Essie Tregowan, who is like this Cornish woman, and it goes through like all her interesting story. So they changed that to make her Irish, so that they could link her up with Mad Sweeney. And I thought that I liked how they did it, because essentially they tied into how Sweeney was looking at Laura currently, and that because essentially they say Mad Sweeney is the one who caused the accident, essentially, under Wednesday's orders.
Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of implied in the book that is also what happens, although it is not explicit. Then the show they do make it explicit. But I think part of that, so he feels guilty, but he also kind of likes her because she's kind of, after she's dead, she's like kind of like a fun asshole with him, and I think he kind of likes that. And he also feels kind of like guilty, but he also kind of remembers like the Irish women and people who kind of brought him to America, and I think the idea is that she kind of reminds him of those people. And there's a whole thing about like how the coin is sort of like linked to the money that he was given back in Ireland to help, as sort of as a prayer, and that's kind of like a whole thing. And it was interesting. I kind of like that. There's that was like an addition I liked. An addition I didn't like was Vulcan. I didn't think that really worked.
Well, let's have Sam finish it, because I have a question for Sam.
Yeah.
He's done for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've already said like most of what I have to say about my feelings about the show.
Okay.
There were things that I liked. But the overall aesthetic, I don't know, it just feels very like David Lynch or like 1980s music video kind of feel to it. Or not even 1980s, more like even like 1990s music video.
Like a Tool video.
Like the like weird creepy 90s music videos that would, like 9 Inch Nails or like
or a Tool video.
Well, he has said.
I haven't really seen any Tool videos, but like
You've seen Schism. You've probably seen Schism. That's the famous one.
Yeah, Also,
I
he's
know the pieces fit.
Brian Fuller has
Oh yeah,
said,
I actually love the Tool, but
right. Or like
Ben.
even Nirvana had like some weird
Yeah,
yeah.
but come on,
videos. Or like
listen. So David Lynch did Twin Peaks, and they have said that is an inspiration for the show in a lot of ways.
yeah, yeah.
So I think you're right.
But that, I mean, that, like, I think that's where what they were trying for, and like, I get it and I understand it, but like, it just didn't work for me.
Okay, so what do
Mhm.
you? So I mean, like it's hard because as you're saying all this stuff, and I like half agree with you, half disagree, and I guess where my point is I'm thinking like it's like I guess part of the difference is I'm giving a little more tolerance in my head for some of these things you're mentioning, which I agree with, and also because I'm not as attached to part of it is I'm not as attached to American Gods as I am to other Neil Gaiman stuff.
Mhm.
But anyway, my point is like yes, you bring up a good point. I guess maybe the aesthetic, whether like I don't know if it was really like Brian Fuller saying, well, you said he said something about Twin Peaks, but I don't know if Brian Fuller saying, hey, the way we're gonna sort of translate and adapt the sort of bleak tone and all that kind of dark, grim, gray stuff in American Gods is we're gonna go the whole sort of I haven't seen Twin Peaks, but sort of I
I
guess
haven't
horror,
either.
weird,
Yeah.
artsy route. And yes, I think that choice might not be the best thing. I'm just wondering what would work. Because I mean, obviously some things couldn't. Like you can't, you have to have some things more explicit, like we were saying the Loki thing. But I'm just wondering, Sam, like what? Obviously, like I'm not saying you know the actual answer to making the entire show better, but like if they're trying to maintain the bleak tone and they're trying to translate it, what sort of thing would you have wanted to
So,
see?
so this is what I would say. I wish that like overall that the tone of most of the show had been more understated.
Hmm.
Um, where like it's more like, oh, there's things
Oh,
going on under the
yeah.
surface, but you're not quite sure. Or like
Hmm.
I'm gonna throw a word out there, liminal, right?
Hmm.
Liminal is a word that means like you're not quite sure, like whether something is happening or is not happening, or
Right.
like where the line is, where's the boundary. It's
Yes.
like sort of unclear.
Hmm.
That's what I wish they had done with this show. Like make the audience uncomfortable not by showing them weirdness, but by showing them something that they're not sure whether it's weird or whether it's normal.
Right. Which is what it is. Actually, that's an interesting thing because there's a lot of. So I think you have a point because one of the problems of the show is because they're actually pretty explicit that things are happening. So whenever Shadow says he says a few times like I don't know that this is going on, and they have this repetition. And just so you know,
Yeah.
Sam, he does say that throughout the
Yeah,
season, and it's kind of like,
yeah.
well, what do you mean? I mean, maybe the first couple times,
But like
like,
you're seeing like crazy stuff happening right
yeah,
in
you
front of your
see,
face.
I mean,
Like
Well,
yeah, yeah,
that's definitely something I think they didn't really handle as well.
right.
Shadows,
yeah,
But that's a
belief, like type of thing. I think in the book, the problem is like I think what they wanted to do is something that they weren't able to do, which is to end it with the big, House on the Rock reveal at the end, which is sort of like when Shadow kind of sees all
Well,
the
it's so clear he
gods.
was Odin. Like it was so clear he was Odin. So when he says I'm Odin at the end, like if you didn't get it, like by that point, well,
Well,
honestly,
then you're an idiot. Yeah.
or to be fair too, it's just I just think at least half of the people watching it got it ahead of time,
Hmm.
anyway. So when he says that, it's like, yeah, okay, like you're Odin, like he keeps like there's just so much there saying it. It's like so it's not much of a reveal. It's just him finally saying that that's his name, but that's not what you're kind of looking for,
Yeah.
you know. Um, so I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Sam. I mean, I think so. I'm trying to think like what I like in the show, what I don't like in the show. I mean, part of it is just Ian McShane is just so great as Wednesday. That's a part of it. Um, I do feel like I like the first half of the season than like the second half. Um, I thought like I just thought like his interactions with Wednesday
Hmm.
were pretty good, and
Yeah.
I
Uh-huh.
liked some of that, and I thought like Laura, they're taking a different sort of direction in some sense, but I kind of like what she's doing. And I do like the coming to America pieces. Like I think those little vignettes are good. Like I like how it's just showing different stories of coming to America. I also just kind of find that interesting. But again, in the beginning, I was kind of like, okay, this makes sense that Shadow is not as understated as he is in the book because, it's a show, so he's going to have to be more expressive.
Yeah.
But then as time went on, I'm like, I kind of felt like, why is Shadow here? Like, why is he important? It's kind of like obviously he's important to the plot, but I kept feeling like I'm not sure I care about him being around right now. I mean, really more towards the end of it.
Yeah.
So, and it sort of became more about Laura, which again is fine. It's just that I was like, why are we talking about Shadow and what's going on here? It's kind of just him watching Wednesday do all his Wednesday shit.
Right. Well, this is a classic problem with adaptations of things where there's a lot inside someone's head, which I think is one of the things they really screwed up with a lot of the early John stuff in Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's always, and like actually, the truth is, even with Ned too, they're always thinking about all sorts of stuff, and you kind of see where their decisions go, and they're not just idiots or rubes; they're like actually thinking about it. But
Right.
and the thing is, the show did actually, by which I mean Game of Thrones, got a little bit better at talking, having him. First of all, Kit Harington got better acting wise at showing things, but I also got better at figuring out how they wanted him to show things too. So I think one of the issues with the American Gods is that they kind of weren't sure always how to express that. And one of the issues that I saw, which I think is what you're talking about, is that they kind of lost track of of how Shadow was supposed to be interacting with everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they had like, okay, it's
Yes.
like we need to. It's like, okay, let's enhance this thing and this thing, and some of those things were fine. Like I said, I do like the Laura and Matt Sweeney stuff. I thought that was fun. But then other stuff were like I don't need to see, media castigating, technical boy, because what the hell do I care about their interaction? It doesn't matter. This is just like an excuse to have like a David Bowie, homage. And it's like, I get that you like David Bowie and I don't have a problem with that, but it's also like, who cares? What does this have to do with anything? I don't need to know how these two people are interacting. Like, at least the Bilquist thing was kind of like a reveal. Like
I kind of like that. I actually kind of liked what they did the last Bilquist thing. I
yeah,
kind of
no,
like that.
no,
Actually.
that's what I'm
I thought
saying.
that was good.
I'm saying at least that one had like, oh, this is why. Okay, now you kind of like pieces kind of came together of the connection. You're like, oh, okay, that was kind of clever because it was a difference in the book, and it made sense though considering. But a lot of the other stuff, I was just like, and also I'm not even sure how they're going to deal with the Mr. World thing. It's because if it's supposed, one of the problems is they didn't get into like explaining some of like his scam stuff. He basically just did the one scam, which was the bank, and he didn't do any of his stories. Like the whole point of his scam about like the two man scam with the violin and everything is that it's essentially foreshadowing what happens, and that's sort of how Shadow's like, oh yeah, it's the scam. And he's like, yeah, of course. You kind of like sort of like you wanted me to find out because you couldn't help bragging about it.
Yeah.
And I like that, but the thing, so I think that's one of the issues that they have is that they're very enamored with certain aspects of the material, and I think Brian Fuller is also enamored with the idea of making a show that has like importance and it's talking about issues and stuff, like the whole Mexican Jesus thing. It was like, okay, well, that was one of the things.
That was fine.
It was just like, it's just like then I was like, okay, but then they give him stigmata. And I was like, oh, come on. Like him, basically in the scene, Sam, Mexican Jesus essentially shows up as some people are crossing the Rio Grande. And because they're kind of like praying to them, and he kind of helps. He's walking on water, and he pulls someone out of the river. And then everyone gets shot, including him. And he gets kind of shot in his wrists, in the in his hands, I mean, like in the stigmata style. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. And he lands on the ground in like arms outstretched. And it's like, okay, right. And then the stupid thing happens, which is like a tumbleweed comes by and essentially creates a crown of thrones on his head. I'm like, oh, we got it.
No, they have an issue with it.
Exactly.
They keep doing this. That's really the main issue with the show is they keep doing this kind of repetitious thing where they keep hammering things that have already been stated.
Right. It was like, I thought if they had ended the scene before the tumbleweed, I would have said, all right, that worked. But because they
Yeah.
felt like they had to add that next touch, it's like, nope, you really didn't need to add that, and it just made it
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of like
Or
silly.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and they yeah, or like the stuff with the stuff with Vulcan too.
Yeah,
You
I
know what I
didn't care
mean?
for that. It just seemed like
Yeah, it just
it was so
there was big.
obviously.
It,
Sam? Do you know about Vulcan?
No.
Okay, so Vulcan is is a god that Neil Gaiman initially considered using, but he didn't end up putting him in the book. So it's
Okay.
not they didn't make him up full cloth of how they were going to do it. Vulcan is Hephaestus, basically. He's the
Right.
Roman.
He's like a Smith god, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hephaestus is actually a much more decent version of Vulcan, the truth
Mhm.
being said, but essentially, yeah, he's a Smith god. And so Neil Gaiman's kind of idea was that he'd kind of become like a god of like armaments and gods, like guns and stuff. And
Right.
with America, guns is a big thing, and it has been forever.
Right.
So that
Right.
was like a thing that they did. They basically made a little town of Vulcan,
Mhm.
and I just felt like it was so obviously Nazi aesthetic, type of thing that I thought,
Right, it was just over the top with
yeah,
it. That just was out of place with the tone of the show. So it's like all of
yeah,
a sudden he's in like a town where like everyone's under like sort of a mind control thing where they have like the armbands that are like a Vulcan armbands to make it look, as you're saying, with the Nazi aesthetic.
yeah,
And again, the point I think was made without even seeing everyone in the town. Like it's like they kept hammering home that point in so many ways throughout the entire like sequence, where they
yeah,
didn't need to. Like it was obvious. Like he's in the whole thing is like he's a black man in like this like racist town, that's all about guns. Like it was very obvious from the beginning, and they just kept like the visuals, as you were saying, they just kept hammering home these visuals. That's like we don't if that's not like a this is not like a new thing that like people aren't that people don't understand the aesthetic or the connection or anything like that. And again, this idea with the guns and the Smith thing, I think, was fine. You know,
yeah,
it's just there was too much, just like you were saying with the Crown of Thorns thing. It was like there was just so much of the imagery when it was already obvious.
yeah.
Also, what's the connection
Yeah.
between Vulcan and like Nazis and fascism? Like, I don't.
But the whole thing, Jimmy, correct me if I'm wrong. The whole thing is like he goes to this town that's like the Vulcan town, and he's sort of his place where like it's employing everyone. They have this like bullet factory,
Right.
and but but the way that it looks, you can just tell by the way that the aesthetic is that it's like it's just supposed to be like this like racist southern town or something. Like that's sort of what it's like, and they're all about guns, and they all have these armbands that look kind of like the Nazi armbands that have like the V on it,
Uh,
and and there's like I don't know, is there like a rope hanging from a tree there, Jeremy? There's like something with that, right?
Yeah, there is.
That's like there. So it's like you have so many of these images that have already existed earlier in the show, and that are then all kind of in there. And they also are kind of marching around the town, right? It's like they have like this sort of parade, right? Isn't there something with that, Jeremy?
Yes,
Am I
yes.
correctly? So that's what I'm saying. So oh yeah, so the point is like Shadow comes there, and then Vulcan's like sort of not explicitly saying stuff to him, but he's kind of like implying that like Shadow doesn't belong there,
Hmm.
but it's like already very clear
Right.
that he doesn't, and it's like
yeah.
why is he? So it's just it's again it's kind of like it's kind of mishandled, and there's kind of too much of that imagery, I think, going on. It's very heavy-handed.
Uh, yeah. So I don't know if you want to read this thing. There's something that Orlando Jones does in Auntie. He gives this kind of like talk where he's talking about Bill Quist in the last episode of the season, and he says like you get to the moral of the story. Do you remember this, Benj?
Yeah, you get the moral I don't know, don't compromise. So I'll read it. You get
Yeah,
the moral I don't know, don't compromise, or don't cut deals with treacherous motherfuckers.
that's Shadow. He's
What?
like, and then so
What?
then
Yeah.
and Hansi's like, what? No. Where are you getting in life without some compromise? The moral is get yourself a queen. And I thought Orlando Jones was really great.
Yeah, he
That's
was.
like, it's like, more of him. That's,
Yeah.
I liked him. The thing is, like, I don't think they always screwed up Shadow. I just think they kind of like lost track because they wanted to do so much,
Right.
and I think that
That's
was
kind
what
of
happened. It got too jumbled. And I
yeah.
think they're like, there's like, okay, we need to do more with Salim, the guy who had sex with the Jinn, and it's like, okay, sure. But then, and there's a lot of other things. Like, I thought, um, what's his face? Not Ibis, Anubis, like Mr. Jackal. He was
Mhm.
cool. I liked him. He was interesting.
Yeah, he was good.
Yeah, so there's a lot of little stuff. The way they did the Jesus thing was kind of interesting. Speaking of, uh,
Yeah, I thought that
which
was
where
cool.
they basically said like, oh, there's basically different versions of Jesus because there's all these people worship in different ways. So there's like the Mexican Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's like the
Okay.
white, there's the waspy Jesus, and then there's like the Virgin Mary, and there's like Greek Orthodox Jesus, and there's Black Jesus, and it's like, and then basically because in the last episode they go to where Easter's having a party and all the Jesuses are there, and it's kind of interesting, including like essentially what they call Jesus Prime in the credits, who is played by Jeremy Davies, and he just sort of looks like the classic American picture of Jesus. Obviously not the
Right.
Middle Eastern version because these are all supposed
Right.
to be American gods, of course.
Right.
But he's pretty good. There's like a scene where he has like a drink and he's like sitting on the water, and then he puts down the glass without thinking about it, and it falls to the bottom, and he's like, "God damn it!" um, so he was good, and then there was like a whole thing where basically Wednesday is like, all these Jesuses, they're basically stole your day from you, and they're like, "Oh, we did? Oh, we're so sorry. Oh, we feel so bad about this." Like, oh yeah, well.
Well, one thing now that I'm thinking about it, just sort of thinking about it as you're talking, like you're saying more Orlando Jones, like, and I agree, and
Yeah.
I think one of the solutions that they could have possibly done that's still maybe not as subtle as Sam what you're talking about, which I think would have been better, but like I think the way that like for instance Anansi like showed up, remember it was like there were the spiders and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden he's there. I
Yeah.
thought like more of that sort of thing would work really well. I mean same thing with was it Anubis?
But it
It's
Hmm.
was,
like
I mean, it was a weird version of Anansi also. Like he
yeah.
shows up and he's already like they're all speaking in whatever their native language, and he like shows up and he's talking in English and he's wearing like a three-piece suit.
Hmm.
He looks very modern and he's like talking about being black and like what it means to be black in America and stuff. But like it really seems out of character for Anansi,
Hmm.
who is really a god of like trickery and humor, right? And like
Mhm.
he's not a god of vengeance or like or like all this stuff about like this like racial resentment and stuff. Like I mean, I understand that it's like in keeping with like African American experience, but not specifically Anansi. It didn't seem to me like it seemed to me like it was a weird choice because like that's not what Anansi typically is.
Yeah, I think they sort of like reimagined the character. I think it seems like there was like a conscious decision to make to change like sort of the tone of the character because also his catchphrase is like angry get shit done. So it's like that's different than like the standard you could say Anansi like trickery thing because Mr. Nancy in especially in Anansi Boys. Oh no, that's Spider. But anyway, the character is a little more is a little more jokestery in the
Hmm.
in the in the book
Yeah.
than this. But like he did a great job in the scenes though. Like like, I really liked his performance in it.
Hmm.
And again, there's like that way of just like sort of him like it's like there. I didn't have a problem with him speaking English because the idea in my head is that he's just able to talk to anyone. So
Right. No, that
so
was fine. Like I understand why they had him talking in English, and I even kind of understand why they had him already dressed like a modern
mhm.
American person. But like his whole attitude, his whole personality seemed like a radical departure from like
Right. Well, I can.
the Anansi of myth.
Yes, I could tell you one of the interpretations I saw of that scene is that essentially he was using the sacrifice to get to America.
Yeah.
That them essentially killing themselves by revolting and burning down the ship is it what let him get to America.
Which is sort of a trickstery thing to do.
Yeah,
I
and it's
mean,
sort of like
yeah,
he doesn't, as you saw, like when there's like the burning wood and you see the spiders crawling out of it.
Right, you see the spire crawling.
Now,
Yes.
that's more like it's a parallel to like the Odin thing too. But the truth is, Nazi wasn't really about, blood sacrifice like Odin was. So it's not quite the same.
Yeah.
But sacrifice is a big part of a lot of the god stuff, and it certainly is historically there, and it's tied into like all these deaths are dedicated, etc. that they go into. And it is interesting, like at the end of the season, Easter is convinced by Mr. Wednesday to like fight back by essentially causing a huge drought and like destroying the crops all over the place. And it's not clear how extensive the damage is, but it's at least for many many miles. Um, so if there's anything that's going to impact modern life, it's the inability to eat. So it's certainly a
right.
problem for like the new gods part of it. And that's not something that ever happens in the book. So, how it's going to happen, I don't know. How many seasons they actually want to do the show, I don't know. Because they certainly talk about continuing on after it ends. It's already been picked up for a second season, and
Yeah.
I don't
It
know
seems
exactly
like
how.
you were talking about this before, how the book has like a clearly defined end, and like it's not just that the book has an end. The entire book, as much as it seems like these like disparate stories that are like all like with different characters and they're unconnected, like they're all part of one bigger plot. Like there's one central plot to the book that like happens and then finishes and then it's over. And like you could continue to tell stories about these same characters, but like that wouldn't be the story that is the story of the book of American Gods. That would be a new story. Which like is fine. Like I mean I don't expect that they're gonna all of a sudden like season 4 would be like Anansi Boys. Like that wouldn't really make sense to me. But like I can see that they would want to continue the show and like tell new stories. But like it feels kind of weird how the book really is telling one cohesive story, and then like for the show to be like, yeah, we're gonna tell that story and then we're just gonna like keep going. Like
Yeah.
like I don't see how that would work.
Well, I mean, there was the spin-off, that short story that Neil Gaiman did with Shadow. That actually was pretty good.
Yeah.
Remember, he like goes to like that sort of
Yes.
not
Yes.
Eyes Wide Shut party, but sort of, right?
Mhm.
It was like it was like a Beowulf sort of homage, which I thought was pretty cool. And then I guess Anansi Boys is a sort of spin-off to the book, but like so I remember, I mentioned before we did the podcast, like I think it's worth us talking about the context of like first of all, the context of this fantasy, this live action fantasy genre, the TV genre, series fantasy that Game of Thrones started, and also just thinking about how to use Neil Gaiman's work and how it can be effective or not effective and things like that, and like it's kind of like, and as we've been talking about this, it's kind of like they're kind of I applaud them. Besides the fact that I applaud them for trying to do Neil Gaiman stuff and for sticking with it, I like that. I also do applaud that they're trying something different, because American Gods is different and weirder. And maybe
Yeah.
that was their thought with Brian Fuller. I'm just sort of thinking about this as I'm talking, but it's like maybe that's why they picked him, because I didn't really know much about Brian Fuller, but now knowing some of his work, maybe they're like, well, we're trying to do a different thing. We're not trying to do another Game of Thrones spinoff or something like that. We're trying to do something that's a little weirder. It's kind of like an urban fantasy thing, but it's also fantasy, and it's by this established fantasy writer, but he's kind of a cooler writer, and it's also like a cult classic, but it's also
Yeah, although it's funny because you guys keep mentioning Game of Thrones as like an inspiration for this, but in some ways I think like another inspiration for this might be Once Upon a Time, because Once Upon a Time was also like a TV show that's like, let's do something weird and different, and we're going to tell stories about like fairy tale characters, but like in the modern world, and like all the same things that animated their like interactions and conflicts in fairy tales will like animate their interactions and conflict in like this modern world that they live in. Okay. I think there are some like real like clear like parallels.
Okay, but I guess what I'm saying is it was Once Upon a Time, but that's a network show, right? It's on network TV, right?
Yes, it's a network show.
But I think there is actually a noted difference in the sense of like I get again, this is kind of like a vibe thing. So like you can say like this, like I can't really make an argument here, but I got the vibe this was like Stars, and I'm not saying they shouldn't because they're a network, but this was Stars like big push to try to just try to sort of contend with these like big blockbuster shows, kind of like Game of Thrones, and like, well, this is our version, and we have this. Again, nothing wrong with that. I mean, they're a network, and they're trying to compete, and they're trying to show better stuff, and I think they should try to show good stuff. But it's
No,
like,
I mean, like, listen, you're right.
like
Like,
this was like to the level of, I mean, in terms of like explicit content or whatever, it was to the level of Game of Thrones, at least. If you see the whole season, like it is. Which again, I don't have an issue with. It's just like, I got the sense they're trying like, the weirder route with it. What were you saying, Sam?
no, I was just saying, like, yes, like, obviously, Stars' competition is not ABC.
Right.
Like, Stars is
Right.
trying to compete with, like, HBO and Showtime
Netflix.
and, like, Netflix, yeah, you know. But, but I do think that, like, there's, um, in the DNA of, like, American Gods, in addition to, like, what you had mentioned about Twin Peaks and Game of Thrones, I think, like, Once Upon a Time is also in there somewhere.
Hmm.
Okay. Well,
And in addition to like what the things that Brian Fuller has worked on.
I mean, I will say too, like, so again, so if we're thinking about the different Neil Gaiman stuff, so again, I haven't finished Sandman. I need to. I hope they do make a Sandman show. I think it's definitely worth it being at least attempted to be made. I think that would be cool. Um, I haven't seen Coraline, but I've read Coraline, and it was awesome. I haven't seen Stardust nor read it. Um, uh, and then there's Beowulf. Neil Gaiman like co-wrote that, I believe. I think he co-wrote the screenplay
Hmm.
for that.
Really?
But
I
yeah,
Yeah.
didn't
I'm
know
pretty
that.
sure, right? Right?
Yes.
I'm right about
He
that. Yeah. So
contributed. Exactly what that means, I don't know. But
yeah,
anyway.
but it again, like, there's something really like I found with Beowulf. I was like, like it wasn't like this like cheesy dumb movie. It was like these kind of points. It's kind of like when they get into the symbolic realm. It's kind of the issue I have with Mr. Robot, for instance. Like Mr.
Hmm.
Robot, like I find like almost every scene there's this long soliloquy, and this like speech. It always gets to it, in almost or monologue in almost every scene. It's just very like these like big cinematic images. And I kind of had the same issue with American Gods, and like I feel like even with Beowulf, that it was like they were trying to. I understand they were trying to maybe not just go, here's the typical fantasy action route. They're trying to give substance, but the substance was like there was some issue connecting with it. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe that it's like the connection with like old school stuff and like with things in the past and with mythology and all that. Like when you're reading Neil Gaiman, you're like, wow, he really has a grasp on this because he's just such a masterful storyteller, and you're hearing his voice, and he ropes you in, he weaves it, like, and he's really good at kind of skirting that line, um, which, I mean, that's kind of what Sandman is, and so much of what he does is like skirting that line, really, in all of his stuff between fantasy and reality, and I really don't know how they would be able to pull something like this off in cinema, and I think that's the problem you're speaking to, Sam, where it's like if they were to do it well, it would be like things in the corner of your eye, or like you weren't sure it was happening at least till later on, and I just don't know how it can be translated well cinematically. I hope it can. I just don't really know how it can be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of an example of something that is like like a television or movie property that really does have that like sort of like in between space
There
where
might be a
it's like
sci-fi one. There probably is a sci-fi example.
um I was thinking like I don't know like well I'll have to like think more about that because
Does
I don't have
Stranger
an
Things, you think?
example.
I mean, Stranger Things is a little more explicit. Like, there is sort of things out of the. Wait, Sam, have you seen Stranger Things yet?
No, I haven't seen Stranger Things.
Oh, you need to do that.
All right.
I don't know.
Well,
Maybe like some of the stuff that happens on Lost, like,
yeah, maybe.
but
But
other stuff
of
on Lost is
course,
like clearly like there's something weird going on.
yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's kind of like a magical show. But all right,
yeah.
I want to kind of move on here for another kind of thing. So one of the things that's interesting about the show, since it's been in production for so long, is people have been doing like fan casting forever. And
Right.
like so, for example, a very classic thing people have been bringing up is The Rock for Shadow.
Yes.
And everyone is like, oh yeah, that's gonna be great. Uh,
Mhm.
although Jason Momoa was one more recently after the Game of Thrones stuff,
Mhm.
but I think one of the ones that people really wanted that didn't happen was Christina Hendricks for Easter, who
Yeah.
definitely fits how she's described in the book,
Right.
and the way they did it is a different take because Kristen Chenoweth is very kind of like petite.
Hmm.
Right.
I mean, she's not skinny, but she's small, so it's a little bit different. Whereas like Easter's sort of described as like I think they say her cup overfloweth, type of thing. Now, here's something that hasn't happened yet. There hasn't been a casting of Hinzelman, and here's
Right.
a, so who do you think would be a good Hinzelman? Now, some people say Clint Eastwood, but that's stupid. So forget about that.
No, Clint Eastwood is a very bizarre choice.
Now,
That's I don't get that.
I was thinking like maybe like Malcolm McDowell or some,
Mm.
if you want to go younger, you could even do something like Andy Serkis if he's willing to do TV, which he should be.
Well, but Hinzelman is not supposed to be young, right? He's
No,
supposed to be kind of like
yeah.
ageless, but like not really young, but not old either. Or like maybe he is kind of old. Like it's kind of hard to tell, right?
Hmm. So what, like Tilda Swinton? I mean, I don't know.
As
I mean,
yeah. I mean, he's the cop, right?
no,
Oh,
he's the evil kobold that's technically running the
okay.
town. He's the one who he almost gets the cop to kill himself. The cop almost.
Actually, speaking of Once Upon a Time, Robert Carlyle,
Mm-hmm.
who
Could be.
plays he plays Rumpelstiltskin
Yes, I know
on
who you're
Once Upon a
talking about.
Time. He
Uh,
actually would be fantastic for Hinzelman.
well, it's funny you say that because he actually did show up in one of the fan casting things I saw for Hinzelman.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure that anyone else would know who he was. But yeah, so I'll tell you, here are the worst choices I saw for fan casting. Melissa McCarthy as Easter.
Yeah.
Um,
Melissa McCarthy.
Chris
That's a
Rock as Mr. Nancy. That's a terrible,
Why
terrible
is that
choice.
is that terrible?
Yes.
I don't know actually.
Now,
yeah,
I saw
that
people
is a terrible
say,
choice. But you know who would make an amazing Mr. Nancy? Um,
yeah,
Morgan Freeman.
yes, that came up a lot.
Yeah.
Morgan Freeman would
Yeah.
be amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah, he would be. Well, the only reason I'm saying that Chris Rock might not be awful is because Mr. Nancy's pretty flamboyant, and Chris Rock can do the flamboyance.
I don't know. I don't think he really can. Here's one
What
that
about
came.
Kevin Hart?
He could be
Kevin
Spider.
Hart is
He could
He
be
could be.
Spider.
Oh, he could be Spider. Oh, here's one that
actually
people.
yes he could be Spider. That's true.
A classic thing I saw a lot was Brendan Gleeson. For people wanted Brendan Gleeson to play Odin or Hinzelman or basically everybody. Uh,
Brendan Gleeson. I can't really
you
think
know
of
who
him.
Brendan Gleeson is? He's that giant Irish actor.
Um.
He was Mel Gibson's best friend in Braveheart. He played Mad Eye
Oh.
Moody in Harry
Oh.
Potter.
Yeah. 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 Okay. All right. Um.
Yeah.
eh, I mean, I don't really see him as Mr. Wednesday, but I could see him as Hinzelman.
Yeah, anyway, he is tall. I saw him in real life. He's like over 6 feet tall. But
Mhm.
I don't know if that really works for Hinzelman. All right, so I think that's enough of American Gods specifically. I think what Sam wanted to talk about was briefly sort of like a comparison. There are other fantasy TV shows that are based off of books, and some of
Right.
them have succeeded, some of them have not succeeded. I mean, obviously, Game of Thrones is 100% the most successful of that kind of thing. That I
Right.
mean, you can't really compare. There was like there's some kind of there was something called the Shannara Chronicles on MTV that was kind of stupid. I couldn't I could not get through
I
it. It was
I
not good.
definitely did not watch that. Um, I, maybe one of my friends told me that they thought it was like fun in a campy way, but
Mm.
yeah, I don't know. It's
Well, there was
I don't think it's really,
there was a
you know.
miniseries of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, I don't know.
Yes. I actually only saw the first episode of that, and I had meant to go back and watch it, but I do have a few things to say about that. At least the first episode
Okay,
as an adaptation.
go on.
Did you watch it, Jeremy?
I did. I've seen the whole thing.
Oh, you've seen the whole thing. Okay, and you've read the book, right?
Yes. Yeah, I got it from
So,
you.
You probably did. Yeah. So I really liked the book, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell.
Hmm.
Norrell.
Whatever.
And the show, Mr. Norrell, I think is how it's pronounced. I really did not like the show. I really thought the show was like very sort of like bland, like completely failed to capture the like, because like the book is written with this like sort of fun, lighthearted narration that's like very like,
Yeah.
droll, and like there's a lot of like like dry wit and observations and stuff like that. But like the show just doesn't have any of that stuff at all.
Yeah, there are definitely creepy elements, but it felt like they just went crazy, in the show,
Yeah.
just like getting it so dark, you know.
Yeah, but also like not just that it's dark, but like the book is supposed to be reminiscent of like a Jane Austen novel, like
Hmm.
and the show really doesn't capture that tone at all. I didn't think. There were a couple of things that I did like in that episode. The more like magical scenes, like especially there's a scene where you remember the scene where Childermass goes to the street magician, what's his
Yes,
name, Vinculus,
right,
and he like has it, and he like Vinculus like reads his fortune with tarot cards.
right.
I thought that scene was like really well done, and like that
Hmm.
really felt like okay, there's something magical going on here. It's cool, it's creepy, it's but like most of the show didn't really capture that feel.
Hmm.
Um, anyway,
Well,
and
it's it.
also just
Yeah,
like the character of Jonathan Strange, like he just seemed like his character just seemed like kind of stupid in the show, like not like I mean in the book whatever. It was just kind of different in a bad way.
all right. Well,
Um,
so
yes.
let me before you get into like things that you've seen. So I thought it was fine. I wasn't a huge fan, but I thought there was some cool like visual stuff with it.
Yeah.
Uh, in terms of like, there's a lot of properties that are being talked about. Some that are definitely coming out, some of which are probably coming out, and some which I put the for like the Watchmen show that's been talked about recently, and we'll see. I give that one a big grain of salt. Dark Tower is finished, so that's coming out.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't actually read the book, but I mean it's coming out. Uh,
Oh,
Wait,
I've read Dark Tower.
who's the actor doing it again? I just saw this recently. Doing Dark Tower. Who's the lead?
Oh, Idris Elba. He's the
yeah.
lead.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Cool.
Good Omens has been optioned. Again, I don't know if that will happen, but it has been optioned, so it can.
Have you guys read that? You guys have read that, right?
Yeah, of
Which
course.
I
Good Omens?
haven't. I haven't.
Yeah, yeah, I've read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I read literally nothing by Terry Pratchett.
That's the only Terry Pratchett book I really like. But the, of course, I mean, I don't. Who knows what's happening with Sandman? It's impossible to know. But King Killer Chronicles was also optioned, as you heard about that. Lin-Manuel Miranda is supposed to like be involved in some way. I don't.
Right.
I mean,
What Chronicles? You said?
the King Killer Chronicles, the Patrick Rothfuss books. Of course,
No.
he's supposed to have
Yeah,
three.
because
And
Lin-Manuel Miranda is like a huge
yeah,
Patrick Rothfuss fan. I'm pretty sure. At least
yeah,
I think he said one of the songs, like the story of Tonight, is sort of loosely based off of a scene in a
Yes.
Rothfuss book. He
Yes.
said something like that. I've
Yes.
never read any
hmm
Rothfuss, but I was like, that's kind of cool.
yeah. And there's all sorts of like other like rumored things of various different, like Seven Eves, like that Neil Stephenson book, which is like my least favorite of his books, which is like whatever. It's a weird.
Oh, I haven't read that one. I've read most of Neil Stephenson's books, but not that one.
Um, well, I did get his new one, so I'll see how that is.
Hmm.
There's supposed Liza Locke and Lamora was optioned, but it doesn't mean anything's happened with that, just because
Right.
all that means is basically that the rights were picked up, but whether or not it will happen, I don't know. Dragon Riders, a Pern was had rights bought, but I mean, I don't know. A lot of these things are just like, will something happen? Who knows? Because a lot of these things just fall through the cracks because
Yeah.
everyone wants to be the next Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones is going to be ending in like 2 years, so people want to get out there, and I think American Gods is trying to do that. So I think finally we can get into like the whole magicians thing. Now, I have read The Magicians, which is the Lev Grossman's book series, which is
Right.
kind of like the kind of sort of like the what if Narnia was real but kind of awful, and what if instead of Harry Potter kids going to boarding school, they go to essentially college, and it's all kind of adult, so they all bang each other and take magical drugs and, have problems, blah, 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 sexual assault, all the fun stuff associated with an adult version of Harry Potter. In the show, they age up people more to make it easier. They make it essentially a magical grad school.
Right.
It makes it easier because then you can just, you don't have to worry about having like really young people. And it's just like, there's enough college stuff out there. So they go a little bit further, which I thought was a fair choice. Um, and anyway, so the first season I kind of liked, but it was a little bit messy. And I really did like the second season a lot. One of the things
Okay, so let me just let you know. I haven't seen the second season yet because I'm watching it on Netflix, and Netflix
okay,
doesn't have the second season.
all right,
Hopefully soon. But I did. I mean, I've read all. There's 3 books. I've read all the
yes.
books, and I watched the whole first season
So
of The
you saw
Magicians.
the point where they go to the, Narnia-ish, other worlds part,
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
la-
yeah.
and you see the part
Yeah,
where
that's in the
where she
last
calls
couple of episodes.
her by the wrong name, Margot. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and I thought that was clever. And they kind of, I don't want to say what happens, but in the second season they go a little bit further with some of that kind of stuff. And I appreciated a lot of the things they did with the magicians.
That was. I assume that was like they were like basically openly acknowledging they're like, yeah, we changed some things from the book. This is like a different version of the story, but like because they had that whole
Yeah.
idea of like this being like a time loop that happens over and over again, and there's like
Hmm.
differences. So like,
That's a
this
clever
is
way to
like
do it.
right, right. So this is like the same story, but like a little bit different. Like it's always a little bit different each time it happens.
Yeah, I like that
So that's
perspective.
that's a cool idea. Yeah,
Um,
right.
I
And it was cool how she called her by the wrong name.
I do like, the guy, Appleman, and Summer Bishop, the guy who plays, the two sarcastic characters. They're pretty good. They're
I'm
like,
sorry. Wait,
the two sarcastic characters in The Magicians.
you mean Elliot?
Yeah,
Elliot, you're talking about Elliot and Margot?
yeah, right.
The
They're
two like they're the ones who are like they're not like quite like the main characters, but they're like friends with them, so they're always around.
yes,
Right. Yeah. No, they're awesome.
yeah, and they gonna in the second season also they basically enhance a lot of the other characters. They give them a lot of their own storylines and stuff. I think it's
Hmm.
I like that. It's interesting because it's not like a hugely successful ratings wise, but it's pretty good considering what it is, which is on Sci-Fi Network.
Right.
Which,
Well, the Sci-Fi Network does not have like a great reputation
yeah,
for like for shows for producing original shows,
Mm-hmm.
but like they have made a couple of decent shows recently. I mean that's one of them. I'm also a big fan of Dark Matter, which isn't actually a sci-fi original show. It's actually a Canadian show that was produced by the Space Channel, but it was done like in connection with the Sci-Fi Channel in America. But anyway, um, but I do think that that sci-fi is like really, you know, getting a little better at like
hmm
producing like quality shows. And like The Magicians. So here's the thing. Like I want to talk about The Magicians in the context of American Gods because they're both like books that I read and I liked the books, and then they were made into TV shows. And the
hmm
TV shows depart from the books in substantial ways, and in both cases. But for the Magicians, it was a show that I really enjoyed, despite the fact that it departed from the books in a way that like it's kind of the opposite of like the American Gods, which I did not like specifically because of the way it departed from the book.
hmm
Like for instance, the Magicians, the book is really like about like how the characters are all like aimless and like directionless, and they're just like looking for just anything to do with their lives. Like they don't know what to do.
hmm
Even though they're like, oh, we're gonna go to this magical school and it's gonna be awesome, and they like learn magic, but then they're like, so what do we do now?
yeah,
And like the only reason they end up going to like the magical Narnia land is because they're like, oh, we've just like found something to do, let's go, and they just like go like without any plan, without any particular idea. On the show, it's like totally different. On the show, there's this whole like plot about how like the main character Quentin is like, he's like this powerful evil guy is like trying to kill him for reasons that we don't really understand, and he's like trying to escape and survive, and like all the characters are like afraid. The villain he's called the Beast. Like they all think the Beast is like coming to get them and kill them, and so like they have to try to kill him. It's like it's so different, and yet I don't know. It's just really fun. There's something about it that appeals to me, and there is some like sort of trashy like, you know, like they're not in high school, but that kind of like high school drama ish stuff with like relationships and like people like, um, you know, dating and then like breaking up and then having sex with other people and then being mad at each other and stuff. And like that's in there too, and it's like a little bit cheesy, but it's also fun. There's something I don't know. Maybe it's just that I haven't quite gotten to that point in American Gods where I feel like what's happening is fun, other than the
Yeah.
character of Mr. Wednesday. Like he is fun,
Mm-hmm.
and like I enjoy watching him, and I want to see him on the screen, and like, but like for the most part, American Gods just seems like, they're not particularly they fit like the hook for American Gods. The show is like, oh, there's like a mystery and like crazy things are happening, and like you're trying to figure it out, and like, what's happening to Shadow and why is he involved in all this? But like it doesn't, at least in the first couple episodes, it doesn't seem like they're like, you should watch the show because it's like fun to watch and like things are happening that you'll like enjoy seeing on the screen. And like The Magicians, I think, has a very different idea of like what it's trying to do to appeal to an audience, where it's saying like, and The Magicians also has some like fucked up stuff that happens, like really like dark, messed up, violent, gory things that happen. But that's fine because at the same time, it's also like you enjoy watching the characters and like interacting with each other and like learning stuff and like making jokes.
Mm-hmm.
Like hardly anyone on American Gods ever makes a joke, or is like snappy or witty or anything. So it's just I mean I think it's certainly aiming lower. Like I wouldn't call The Magicians prestige TV in the way that I think American Gods is trying to be, but I also think that it's like better than a lot of people probably give it credit for, and that it's probably like not too many steps below that.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take. I don't know, Jeremy. Like what do you think? Because you also have like read the books and watched the show, and like but you liked American Gods, and you obviously liked Magicians enough to watch 2 seasons of it. So,
Well, I think I
what do
think
you think?
American Gods is a better book
Hmm.
than any of the Magicians books.
Okay.
But I think even Lev Grossman would be easily willing to tell you
Yeah, I think so.
that. I mean, I'm sure he would say that Neil Gaiman is one of his influences because I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
it
Oh,
is.
of course, of course.
But that being said, I feel like it took less time for the Magicians to figure out what they wanted to do than it has for American Gods.
Yeah, and maybe one of the problems is also just that America, like you're dealing with something, American Gods is very heavy and complex, and it's kind of weird, but it's not just weird for weird's sake. Like again, Neil Gaiman is a masterful writer, so it's like it's a difficult thing to pull off. So I think maybe that's part of it is that it's like Sam, you were saying, like it's not fun in the same way, and it's not supposed to be a fun book necessarily. It's it's
Right,
got
but I
some
mean, I'm
levity
not
there,
talking about the
but
book here because like I liked the book and I enjoyed it,
no,
and
no,
it's
no, 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 no,
the book holds me in a way
no,
that
no,
the
no, no.
show doesn't.
That's sort of my point. What I'm saying
Yeah.
is that it's American Gods. I mean, first of all, they have a difficult task, but it's also like you know it's like they're trying to show the drama of it and the weird intrigue, but it's like also they have this whole kind of like cool aesthetic ish weird like kind of like you said, like the sort of David Lynch thing going on at the same time, and it's not necessarily really clicking with kind of the sort of understated drama and weirdness of the American Gods story, or the original one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but like I think that's why. So I mean, something again, I haven't read or seen Magicians, but it still sounds like it's simpler to grasp. Not that it's like a stupidly simple story, but that it's sort of simpler. Like Neil Gaiman has so many layers to what he's doing, so it's like it's just difficult to, I don't know, it's difficult to take on.
Hmm. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I'm willing to give the show credit to try something better in the
Yeah.
second season because I feel like
Yes,
I
me too.
saw the potential there, and there's enough I liked about it that I
You're talking
think
about, I'm sorry, Jeremy, you're talking about American Gods
I
here?
am. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, I think that because of that, I'm sort of like I said, I'm willing to give it some
Yeah,
kind of slack.
me too.
Yeah, it's just very different, and it's such a difficult thing to do. I mean, the truth is it as good of an adaptation as the first season of Game of Thrones? No, it
No,
is not.
no.
Game of Thrones first season is still their best season.
Yeah, I think you're
And,
right.
and and in retrospect, I think that's definitely proven, at least to me, to be the case. And although a lot of people like many of the other seasons more, I think they're wrong. So,
I mean, I
I
liked
mean,
second
I think
season
there's
too.
I
Yeah.
think there's an argument to be made that the fourth season might be better than the first season, but I really liked the first season. Like I would not argue with you about the first season being really good.
So good.
well,
I
yeah,
mean,
I mean, there are definitely things I very much enjoyed in a lot of things. It's just like the fact is that so much was so correct. You know, the mountain was the best for sure, and I don't want to get into a huge rant about that because I know it's not their fault about that one. But Sean Bean was so good
Yeah.
as it says basically it's about as perfect casting as you can get. I mean, Mark Addy as Robert was really good. And it's just basically like, even though there's a lot of little things here and there that are like, well, you can look back and rewatch and be like, well, that didn't. But the truth is, you can nitpick as much as you like. I just thought it captured it so well, and it captured people so well. And
mhm.
not everyone knew Game of Thrones in the same way, but there's a reason that became like a cultural thing. American Gods is definitely interesting, and they want it to be the next Game of Thrones, but I don't think that's going to happen. It's too
Yeah,
confusing. It's too,
yeah,
and he doesn't, and the show is not making it easy to understand either. They are
yeah,
intentionally putting in, things that are like, what is going on here? And, a way I'm fine with that because I don't mind challenging media, especially because
Right.
I actually know what they're talking about. But all that again being said, I feel like, you know, it's just not going to hit those heights. Part of
yeah.
it is I do think, in a weird way, the amount of time that they had to look at Game of Thrones, the first book, was more. They had, a few more years that it was out there, and there was more of a time to really think about it, think about what would work and what wouldn't work. And I think it
Right. And
really
also, I
does
mean,
work.
Game of Thrones, while it is like a very big, complex story, it's also still a much more straightforward story than American Gods.
Hmm.
Uh-huh.
Um, so like I think it's a little easier to translate that and just to have like mass appeal.
Yeah,
You know,
it's just
like
large in scope, but it's not like a, yeah, you're right. It's still a linear story.
exactly.
And yeah.
Yeah.
I
Like
mean,
I mean,
but
I do think that American Gods is not trying for that like Game of Thrones audience, like in the sense of like they're like you said, Jeremy, they're never going to be that big of a hit, like because it's just not that kind of property. But I think they're going for something that's a little bit more like offbeat, like I mean, Brian Fuller was a showrunner on Hannibal, right?
Yes.
Like Hannibal was never going to be like the biggest hit on
No.
TV, but it had its core audience of people who were like, wow, this is like a cool show. This is a weird show. It's different from other shows. Like
mhm.
American Gods, no one like I mean even though I didn't like it that much, like I would never deny like this is a show that's trying to do something different,
Right.
you know. And like that and I respect that and I admire it. And at the same time, like it's never going to be super mainstream popular, even as much as Game of Thrones, which itself is like a little bit off the beaten path.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but it's more. I'm trying to think of like another example of a show that like was like intentionally trying to be. I don't know. I guess like it goes back to Twin Peaks again, right? Like
I
you
mean,
know.
I never saw it, so it's really hard for me to feel like
Yeah, me too.
an
I've only seen a
understanding
little
about
bit of
it.
Twin Peaks. I've watched a few episodes. I haven't seen the whole thing.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'm aware of how
The
weird it
original. I'm
is.
talking about the original Twin Peaks, not the remake.
It's not a
The
remake;
remake
it's a follow-up, but yeah.
or follow
It,
up or
it'll
whatever
it'll
it is.
be it'll be interesting to see though, like if they're what's the next Game of Thrones. I mean, sometimes it's always just problematic anyway because at the end of the day, most of the time, things that are trying to be like the next thing usually are failures, and then whatever that little subgenre is gets really bad for a while.
Hmm.
That's kind of how these things go. But like, it would be interesting to see. I don't know if it'll happen or not. If like one of the next big fantasy hits is a contemporary fantasy thing. I mean, again, Stranger Things has been big, and horror I think is technically in the fantasy genre, but it still is kind of a different thing. It's
Hmm.
not like people are like with Stranger Things, like, oh, this is like the new Game of Thrones or this is the new fantasy. It's more like um, here's this awesome horror sort of throwback shows that's actually
Yeah.
really awesome.
I feel
Um,
like there actually is a possibility in the world of American Gods to have like a really expansive universe, just because it is a
right.
really great idea, but I don't know. It's it's tough. I would like to see a really good, next season that's like, more mature, really understanding of what it needs to do. That's what I'd like to see. And I I think they could do it. We'll see. I feel like it could be all right. I mean, listen, Tim, if you feel like you can't finish watching it, that's fine. I think that it's not really a big deal either way. There's plenty of things out there that you probably will like better.
Right.
I mean, I. It's funny because I really just reread American Gods right before this came out, so
Mm.
everything was just like, oh yeah, obviously that's what this is, and that's what this is, and that's what this is. It made it really easy, and maybe
Yeah.
maybe like the further away you get, and I did feel like it's really inaccessible to new people.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think that
and
is true. I think at the end of the day, it kind of is. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I've seen people post about it where they say it's really good. This is earlier on in the season. I have seen, posts like saying like, "Oh, this is really good." And maybe there are some people who think it's really cool. I don't know if these people posting it had read it before or not. But like, it does seem a little impenetrable,
yeah,
like to a certain extent, and you got to do a lot of stuff in your mind. And again, that's kind of the thing with it being a novel. You can make these connections in your mind, um, and that can be kind of the fun of it to a certain degree, and it gets you in this sort of state. But it's
hmm.
hard to really translate.
All
We
right.
just we just need a Gene Wolfe show. We need a Wizard Knight. We need a Wizard Knight like trilogy
Well, now
or
you're just
something.
like you really want to get. If you think
Yes.
American Gods is hard to understand,
No, we're like I don't know,
who who would
and
all right? That who would
We
play?
need
Darren
a
Aronofsky.
we need a Netflix original manga version of
No,
Gene Wolfe's The Wizard Knight.
is that
Uh,
gonna be manga?
Darren Darren Aronofsky. I mean, that is
He
a
would
good
be like
choice, but again,
who's gonna be better? Who's gonna be better as the Wizard Knight?
who's gonna greenlight this show? It's gonna be so bizarre. The people are gonna watch the first episode at the studio, and they're like, "No, no." It's like I don't. And then maybe Aronofsky will just like spit in their face. He's like, "You don't understand it." That he won't. He wouldn't spit in their face. He would just look down and be like, "All right, I guess you
And he's
just
like,
don't
don't you
understand it."
understand? This is the next fountain, maybe even the next Noah. So,
Well, yeah. All right, I think we should.
I think you and I love it, Jeremy. So,
I think we should wrap it up. We've had a
Right.
good discussion. I think we all agreed that American Gods is not perfect. Some of us like more things than other people did, but uh, it's the thing that I'm gonna say. Like one of the funny things about a lot of these Star Trek shows is they often took a little while to get going. And Brian Fuller that's how he started. He started on Star Trek, so maybe it's just going to be a similar thing. I mean, I think Voyager had one of those sort of like it went up and down a lot. So I think there's definitely going to be some fanatical fans of the show, but we'll see. You know, I'm reasonably optimistic. All right, anything else post mortem to throw up before we sign off, guys?
No, I'm good.
All right, well, guys,
Benji, anything?
Bench, Sam, nerd you later.
Catch you later.
Nerd you later.